Hey, I'm Laura Jensen. Welcome to my butcher shop here at Jensen Reserve. I've got my own USDA inspected shop right here in my barn on my farm. So today what we're going to work on is cutting a chuck roast or cutting a chuck roll into chuck roast. So with me getting incredibly high, we think it would be very beneficial for everybody to understand how they can cut their own cuts and they can save themselves money and keep the freezer stocked even easier. So I'm going to get started here on how we turn this into chuck roast. Gotta have gloves because I don't work with meat without gloves. If you notice, I've got my headgear on because USDA rules. We have to have something that holds our hair back, and I am fine with that, and I'm sure you guys are too. So these cuts that we're actually doing here, I don't like these gloves, sorry y'all. These cuts end up in our store, in our butcher shop. Alright, so let's get started. I've got my big beast of a knife here, honed and ready to go. Got my chuck roll. I have my other knife, if you will, because I don't want to use my big fancy knife to cut plastic. If y'all saw my last video, that knife was a little too dull, so let's see if we can get it done better with this one. So my goal when I'm busting these cryovac bags is to not cut the bottom. There's always a little blood in them, and you want to make it so that that blood in the bottom stays there. So this is a pretty big heavy piece of meat, whereas I usually am using something a little smaller, but we still will manage to capture that blood, get that bag rolled up, and throw it in the trash. So y'all probably looking at this thinking, chuck roast, huh? How's she gonna do that? Well, obviously not every piece of this is going to be a chuck roast, but we also use these chuck rolls and chuck roasts to make stew beef. So when you look at it like that, ain't no big deal, right? So what I do first is always evaluate the meat. We don't have a square line here. We've got all this over here, and we've got some cleanup work that we need to do here. So none of us want to eat these things, so let's start with getting that off and out of the way. And again, like I always tell people, don't be afraid to jump in if the cuts don't look exactly like you want, or if it just looks like something you don't want to eat, cut it off. Not a big deal. Don't be hard on yourself, and because you're not an expert, you can't get this stuff done. Anybody can learn how to cut meat. If you notice on the knife, you see where my hand is. Good reason for that. That's a lesson that you'll also learn if you're like me. You want to keep your hand behind the knife. You don't want your knuckles getting in front of the knife, because if it slips, it takes your knuckle with it. So anyhow, lesson learned. So now that I've got that cleaned up, and that's a lot prettier, I think you'll agree, I'm going to square off this end. And what I look for is where is the shortest point, so that I'm not getting into what can be my chuck roast. So I don't know if y'all can see that. Let me see. Is that maybe a better angle? And you can kind of see where the knife came in here. So that's where I'm going to cut that. Another thing you can do with this cut of meat is you can turn it into ground beef. So if you've ever heard of ground chuck or chuck burgers, there you go. That's what you've got right here. And you can see that you have a good combination of meat and fat. So that goes. I'm actually going to make two different piles. This is going to be my ick pile, not going to eat it. And this is something that I can either grind, or I can turn it into stew beef, or I can do something else with it. So just going to clean that up. That goes into the good pile. Now at this point, some people choose to use a ruler. Some people like to use their finger and go by the knuckles. I'm pretty good at just taking a swag and doing what I think looks good. So this is where I would cut the first chuck roast. Trying to get an even, smooth cut through the whole thing. Isn't that pretty? God, this meat is so gorgeous, my gosh. I'm just squaring up some ends here so that when it's on your table, it looks nice and clean. So there you go. There's our very first chuck, and that would be great for a small family. If you look at the edges here, we've got a little cleanup to do. Not a big deal. Come in here, fingers behind the knife, and that goes in the I'm not going to eat it stack. You can clean that up. Not really hurting anything. I don't like this little discoloration here, so I'm just going to take that little edge off and put it in that stack. And this one is ready for packaging, so we're going to stack it over there. Alright, so I pretty much showed you how we do it. Now you just keep doing it. So that thickness was pretty good. I'd say that's, I don't know, probably close to 1.5 inches, maybe 1.25 inches. Same idea, you want to add pressure, try to be smooth in your cuts. Alright, so that is that one as it was cut. Again, we've got some cleanup to do. Oh, that looks like something I want for dinner tonight, gotta say. Don't like this blood vessel here. Not awful. Some people don't mind, but personally I don't care for it. Got a little discoloration here, so let's just do just a little bit of cleanup work on this one. There's that. Here's our piece we don't want to eat. Now, if you guys are raw feeders with your dogs or want to cook those for your dogs, that would be fine. And I'm sure you could eat them if you wanted to, but I don't want to eat it. So we've got that cleaned up. That's just not pretty, just the fat right there. So just going to square that off. Now let's see what we have. Beautiful. Oh, look, we need to get that right there. Let's see, how can we get, how about that? That's how we'll get that out of there. That's not uncommon, and again, it's not bad or doesn't mean anything happened that shouldn't have. So let me keep going here. This one is going to be a beast. Alright, let's see what this one looks like. Same thing, need to clean up there. That'll be alright. I can take some of that discoloration off. You see, as we're getting into the meat of it here, that we're getting bigger chuck roast. Alright, where was that part that we didn't love? I think it was this part right here that we've been trimming off the discoloration. Okay, there's another really, really pretty chuck roast that will go package for retail. Let me see if I can spin this around and show you something. I did not get the perfect super clean cut here. That's where I went back in and it shaved it a little bit. That is not a deal breaker. So you can do one of two things. You can smooth it back into the meat, or you can take your knife and trim it off. But by the time it has been packaged, you're not gonna really notice that, as far as it's not gonna stick out in your pot or on your dinner table or something like that. So let's see if we can keep cutting. Whew, he's gonna be big. I am pushing in on the meat because of its tenderness, so that I can get a nice consistent cut throughout, so that my knife doesn't wiggle with the tenderness of the beef. Alright, so now that I am, a little low on cutting board room, I'm going to come back to trimming up the individuals until I get a little further through this. Let's see if we can go ahead and get more cut. my knife caught that one on the back swing just then. I felt it. It's bigger than my cutting board, y'all. I'll go ahead and trim that little tail there. So cut and roast, if you're using inside rounds, other pieces, if you're trying to get rump roast, things like that, it's pretty much the same thing. You may have to stop for a second and figure out kind of what muscle group you're working with, but really it's just a matter of not being afraid to make the cut. All right, let's see what we got going on here. So what I'm seeing is, I mean, I don't really want that on my table. I think that's probably a little more fatty than what most people would like. I'll come in at an angle, trim that off. A little bit of that there. And then what that also tells me, looking at the meat here, we don't really need this tail on here. And if you look at trying to cut the roast, really you can come in right here, go ahead and cut all this off, and then that's what will go into the stew beef or the grinder pile for later. And that will give us a much cleaner roast for our others. Went ahead and cut that piece off because it was in the way, so took care of that. All right, let's see if we can get, we'll try to go a little bigger on this one. If you see that kind of the way the meat goes, I can go a little bit bigger, still catching where it decreases in size right here. See a little outside cleanup that I need to do. Knife is a little dull. Let's see if I still bring it around a little bit. All right. That did help. So whatever this is underneath, definitely not something we want to eat. All right, so where are we at here? This is another, come in and cut that skin off with it. Okay. That one is not all that pretty, is it? Definitely not as pretty as some of the first ones we started with, but I think it'll do all right. I don't think this piece is helping it at all, so let's go ahead and take care of that. All right, so there's that one. Can we get any more out of here? Not sure. Let's take a look. Yeah, I think we could probably get one more. Let's see how it looks. If it doesn't turn out, we'll turn it into stewed beef, right? Or grind it. Shoot, that is some aggravating. I just don't want to come off pretty at all. That's all right. We still gonna turn it into something pretty. Yeah, that didn't make it as a chuck. That's okay. Like I told you, you can always turn it into something else. If you want to turn it into stewed beef, then it is a matter of cutting it into cubes the size you like. I personally like a chuck stewed beef over an inside round because I'm a girl that likes marbling and a little bit of fat on her meat. So you're going to get that out of a chuck, whereas you don't get it on a traditional round or a leaner cut of beef. You can cut these as big or as small as you like. They freeze really great in 1 pound packs and make a good stew or soup. Alright, so it turns out we've got a lot of meat here. So let's look at kind of where we are, stop and evaluate what we've got going on. Out of that entire chuck roast, now granted there's going to be a little bit more here that's going to go in the do not eat pile. Pretty much everything else is something that you can put on your dinner table in one way, shape, or form. And again, by cutting it yourself, you're going to save yourself money. You're going to have the pride of cutting your own meat and doing your own work, and knowing where your food came from because you bought it from us, and knowing that you're eating well and shopping small. So I'm going to keep cutting these guys into stew beef, and then we'll package these for our store as chuck roast. I want to thank you all today for hanging with us and watching another how to cut your own meat video, and we'll keep them coming for you. Thanks for supporting us, and y'all have a great day.